Hey guys, welcome to RedSunStories. Hope you're doing well. Tonight, you'll discover what waits beneath the still waters of a forgotten river, where a young man's chance encounter with an ancient spirit will reveal secrets that humanity has spent centuries trying to forget. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what time it is for you. I would love to connect with you guys. Now, let's dive into tonight's story together. The river ran strangely deep tonight. Mist hung low above the water, twisting into gentle shapes as frogs sang somewhere far away. The air smelled of wet stone and summer grass, that particular scent of rivers when dusk settles and the world holds its breath between day and darkness. At the water's edge, small footprints traced the silt, uneven, webbed, as if something had slipped from the depths, or been led by a silent hand that knew these banks well. Kenji paused at the old wooden bridge, his lantern swaying slightly in the breeze that came down from the mountains. The light caught something floating in the current below. A cucumber, fresh and green, turning gently as it moved upstream against the natural flow of water. That was wrong. Everything moved downstream. Everything except... He felt it before he saw it. A coldness that had nothing to do with the evening air. A presence beneath the surface, watching with eyes that had witnessed centuries of moonlit nights just like this one. The villagers had warned him. Old grandmother Akiko had gripped his sleeve that morning with surprising strength, her weathered fingers insistent. "Never cross the bridge alone after sunset," she'd whispered, her breath smelling of green tea and worry. "The river spirits are hungry in summer. They grow playful when the moon is full." But Kenji had laughed it off, these old tales told to frighten children. He was 17. Practically a man, and he had promised to meet Yuki by the shrine on the other side of the village. Love made fools of the young, his father would have said, made them forget the rules written in water and moonlight. The cucumber bobbed closer, spinning in a slow circle, and then Kenji saw it, a wet handprint on the bridge's wooden rail, small as a child's but with too many fingers, each digit tipped with something that gleamed like a claw in the lantern light. The print was fresh. Water still dripped from it, forming a perfect pool on the weathered wood. Something moved in the reeds downstream. A soft splash, deliberate and curious. Not a fish. Fish didn't pause to watch. They didn't wait with the patience of something that had all the time in the world. Something that measured its life not in years, but in the patient turning of seasons, the slow erosion of riverbanks, the gradual wearing away of stone. "Hello?" Kenji's voice came out smaller than he intended. The mist thickened, and in it, he thought he saw a shape. Small, hunched, with a shell-like curve to its back. But when he blinked, there was only fog and the sound of water lapping against the bridge's supports, a rhythm like breathing. In and out, in and out. His ankle grew cold, wet. He looked down. A hand, green as riverweed, webbed like a frog's foot, impossibly old and impossibly young at once, had emerged from the water and wrapped around his leg. The touch was gentle, almost curious, like a child testing the temperature of bath water. The skin felt slick, alive with the river's chill. And in that moment, Kenji understood with absolute certainty that the tales weren't merely stories told to frighten. They were warnings written in disappeared children, in drowned fishermen, in the strange offerings left at riverside shrines every summer when the waters ran high and hungry. The hand tightened just slightly, not pulling, not yet, just holding, waiting to see what he would do. The cucumber floated past, and Kenji saw now that it bore the marks of small, sharp teeth. The old story said that kappa were creatures of contradiction, mischievous but honorable, dangerous but bound by ancient rules. They lived in the spaces between worlds, neither fully of the water nor of the land, neither entirely spirit nor flesh. They were the river's children, shaped by centuries of human fear and reverence, born from the need to explain why children sometimes disappeared near certain banks, why travelers found themselves pulled beneath dark waters, why some rivers seemed to have personalities of their own. Grandmother Akiko used to tell the tales on summer evenings when the village children gathered on her porch and the mosquitoes sang their high-pitched songs. She would fan herself slowly, her voice taking on that particular cadence of storytelling, the rhythm that matched the flow of the creek behind her house. The kappa, she would begin, are small, no taller than a child of 7 or 8 summers, but do not let their size deceive you. They possess the strength of 10 grown men, gained from the magical water they carry in the bowl atop their heads. That water, you see, is the source of all their power. It connects them to the river itself, to every stream and tributary, every underground spring and hidden well. Spill that water, and the kappa becomes as weak as a newborn kitten, helpless and harmless. The children would lean closer, eyes wide in the lantern light. Their skin is green or yellow, slick with river slime. They have shells on their backs like turtles, and beaks like birds, sharp enough to bite through flesh, they say. Their hands and feet are webbed, perfect for swimming, but clumsy on land. They smell of fish and mud and old water, that scent of ponds that have been still too long. But why do they live in rivers, grandmother? A child would ask. Because that is where they were born, from the river itself, given form by our belief and our fear. They are the water's guardians and its hunters, its playmates and its predators. They love cucumbers more than anything, some say because cucumbers taste like the cool water they crave. Leave a cucumber at the river's edge with the proper respects, and the kappa might leave you in peace. Forget, and well. She would pause meaningfully. The river remembers every slight. Can they be beaten, grandmother? Ah, that is the question, isn't it? The kappa are creatures of honor, bound by etiquette as surely as samurai are bound by bushido. If you bow to a kappa, it must bow back. That is the rule. And when it bows, the water spills from the bowl on its head, and its power drains away. But you must be clever. You must make it want to bow deeply, so deeply, that all the water escapes. The summer Kenji turned 10, he had asked, "Has anyone ever befriended a kappa, grandmother?" She had smiled then, a strange, sad expression. Once, long ago, there was a boy who saved a kappa's life. The creature had become trapped on land, its bowl nearly dry, and the boy had carried water from the river to refill it. In gratitude, the kappa taught the boy the secret of bone setting, a skill that made him the finest healer in all the province. They say that kappa never forget a kindness, just as they never forget an insult. Now, 7 years later, with a kappa's hand wrapped around his ankle and the mist closing in like a living thing, Kenji wished he had paid more attention to those stories, wished he had asked more questions, wished he had learned the proper words, the correct gestures, the ritual formulas that might convince this creature to release him and let him pass. The hand tugged gently, experimentally, testing his balance. Kenji's heart hammered against his ribs, but he forced himself to remain still. Panic would be his enemy here. The stories all agreed on that. Kappa could sense fear like sharks sense blood in water. They fed on it, grew bolder with it. Instead, he did something that surprised even himself. He bowed. Not deeply. Not yet. Just a polite inclination of his head, the sort of bow one might give to a respected elder. His voice, when he spoke, trembled only slightly. "Good evening, honored river spirit. I apologize for disturbing your domain. I meant no disrespect to you or your waters." The hand on his ankle loosened, just a fraction. In the mist below the bridge, something shifted. A head emerged from the water, no larger than a small child's, but ancient beyond reckoning. The face was both human and amphibian, with large, dark eyes that gleamed with intelligence and something that might have been amusement. A beak jutted where a mouth should be, and yes, atop the head sat a shallow depression, a bowl-like cavity filled with water that caught the moonlight and held it like liquid silver. The Kappa regarded him with an expression Kenji couldn't quite read. Curiosity? Hunger? Or merely the patient interest of something very old encountering something very young? Then, slowly, deliberately, the Kappa bowed its head in return, but not deeply. It kept its bowl level, the water barely rippling. The creature was testing him too, Kenji realized, seeing if he knew the old ways, the proper responses. This was a game that had been played for centuries at this very spot, and Kenji was simply the latest participant. The river held memories the way stones hold heat, slowly absorbing, slowly releasing, keeping the warmth of the day long after the sun had set. Every drowning, every offering, every child who had played too close to the edge and learned the hard way about the current's strength, the river remembered. And the Kappa, being born of that water, remembered too. Kenji found himself sitting on the bridge now, his feet dangling over the edge. The Kappa perched on a flat rock below, still partially submerged. The creature had released him after that first exchange of bows, but something in its manner suggested their encounter was far from over. There was a negotiation happening here, conducted in the language of gesture and patience, and Kenji was beginning to understand that he was being evaluated for something. "My grandmother told stories about you," Kenji ventured, his voice barely above a whisper. Speaking too loudly felt wrong, like shouting in a shrine. "She said you've lived in this river for longer than anyone can remember." The Kappa tilted its head, and for the first time, Kenji heard it make a sound, a soft clicking like pebbles being rolled together underwater. Its beak opened and closed, and when it finally spoke, the voice was strange, liquid, as if words were being formed by water flowing over rocks. The grandmother? Akiko? Yes, she knew the old courtesies, brought cucumbers, remembered the songs. The Kappa's eyes half closed, as if recalling something distant. Not many remember now. They cross our bridges with machines that roar, throw their waste into our homes, forget that water has spirits older than their shrines. Kenji felt a pang of guilt, though he wasn't sure why. He had never thrown trash in the river, never disrespected it knowingly, but he realized now that forgetting was its own form of disrespect. The whole village had forgotten, slowly, gradually, as the modern world crept in with its electric lights and paved roads and explanations for everything that left no room for mystery. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "We forget too easily, my generation especially." The Kappa made that clicking sound again, and Kenji thought it might be a laugh. Each generation says this. Each believes they are the last to remember, but the river flows on, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes, someone like you comes along, someone who stops when they see footprints in the mud, someone who bows. What happens to those who don't bow? Kenji asked, though part of him didn't want to know the answer. The Kappa's expression darkened, and for a moment, Kenji saw something ancient and inhuman flicker across that strange face, a reminder that this creature, however small and seemingly fragile, was a predator shaped by centuries of survival. The river takes them, not always, not immediately, but water is patient. It waits for the moment of carelessness, the misplaced step, the too deep swim, the storm that makes currents treacherous. We do not always kill. Sometimes we only frighten or trick or steal small things to remind humans that they share this world with others. But those who show true disrespect, the Kappa's webbed fingers curled into something like fists. The river has a long memory for insults. Kenji thought of the stories. The fisherman who had caught a kappa in his net and beaten it, only to drown the next week in waters that should have been safe. The merchant who had poisoned a stream to kill the fish more easily, found floating face down 3 days later. The children who had thrown stones at a kappa for sport, and the fever that had swept through their family that same summer. But you saved some too, Kenji said, remembering different stories. The boy who fell through ice and was pushed to the surface. The girl who was drowning and felt hands beneath her, lifting her to the boat. The kappa's expression softened, became almost wistful. We are not only killers, any more than humans are only builders or only destroyers. We are complicated. Like the river itself, it gives life and takes it, carves valleys and floods towns, provides food and brings disease. We are part of that complexity. The moon had risen higher now, and its light turned the mist into a luminous veil. Somewhere downstream, night birds called to one another. The world felt suspended between moments, as if time itself had slowed to match the patient flow of water. "Why did you let me go?" Kenji asked. "I didn't trick you. I didn't make you spill your bowl. I just bowed." "Yes," the kappa said simply. "You just bowed. Do you know how rare that is now? Most humans who see us run or scream or try to take photographs with their little machines. Some try to capture us, thinking we'll grant wishes like in fairy tales. But you showed respect. You treated me as your grandmother taught you to treat all spirits, with courtesy and caution." The creature shifted on its rock, and Kenji saw now how old it truly was. Not old in the way humans aged, with wrinkles and white hair, but old in the way of stones and trees, worn smooth by time, patient beyond measure, carrying the weight of centuries in its dark eyes. "I have lived in this river for 300 years, the kappa continued, its voice taking on a rhythm like water over stones. "I have seen emperors rise and fall, wars sweep across the land, villages appear and disappear like mayflies. I have watched your kind forget the old ways, then remember them in times of crisis, then forget again. I have been worshipped and hunted, feared and befriended, and through it all, I have remained here, because this is my river, and I am its guardian, whether humans remember me or not." Kenji listened, fascinated despite his lingering fear. The night had taken on a dreamlike quality, as if he had slipped into one of Grandmother Akiko's stories and now lived inside it, a character in an ancient tale. "Tell me," he said softly. "Tell me about the time before, when people still remembered." The kappa's eyes gleamed, and it settled more comfortably on its rock, the water lapping gently at its webbed feet. And then it began to speak, its voice rising and falling like the river current, carrying Kenji back through time to an age when the boundary between the everyday and the magical was thin as morning mist. In the days when the village was just a handful of houses clustered around the shrine, when the river ran wilder and the forest pressed closer, the people knew the kappa by name. Not this Kappa's true name. That was sacred, never spoken aloud, but the name they had given it, Kawataro, river child, spoken with the same mixture of affection and wariness one might use for a mischievous nephew who was equal parts charming and troublesome. The children of that age grew up with stories as real as the stones beneath their feet. They learned young that certain pools were safe for swimming, and others were not. They knew which rocks marked the boundary of Kawataro's favorite resting spots, which bends in the river were his hunting grounds, which shallow stretches he avoided because the sun-heated water made him uncomfortable. Every summer, on the night of the full moon in the 7th month, the village would hold a festival, not the grand festivals of the cities with their elaborate ceremonies and formal priests, but something smaller, more intimate. The villagers would gather at the bridge, this very bridge where Kenji now sat, and each family would bring offerings to place at the water's edge. Cucumbers, always cucumbers. Fresh from the gardens, still cool from the ground, sliced and arranged on wooden plates. Rice balls wrapped in leaves. Sake poured into shallow dishes. Sometimes children would add their own offerings. Smooth river stones they had found, wildflowers woven into crowns, drawings made with charcoal on bark, and Kawataro would come. Not always visibly, but his presence would be felt. The offerings would disappear overnight. Sometimes, in return, the villagers would find gifts of their own. A particularly beautiful riverstone placed on a doorstep, a lost item recovered from the water, a string of fish left hung from a tree branch near the shore. There was a boy once, the Kappa told Kenji, named Taro. He was the youngest son of a farmer, small for his age, frequently overlooked by his stronger brothers. But Taro had a gift. He could read the river's moods, knew when it would flood or run low, could predict where fish would gather by watching the patterns of sunlight on water. Taro loved the river. While his brothers worked the fields, he would slip away to sit on the banks, watching the play of current and light, listening to the language of water over stone. And one day, sitting on his favorite rock, he saw something that made him freeze with a mixture of terror and wonder. A kappa emerged from the deep pool, not Kawataro, but a smaller one, perhaps younger, its shell still pale and soft. The creature pulled itself onto the bank with obvious difficulty. Its movements were jerky, uncoordinated, and then Taro saw why. The bowl atop its head was nearly empty, just a few drops clinging to the shallow depression. On land, away from the water's edge, the little kappa was weakening rapidly. The safe thing, the smart thing, would have been to run. Any adult would have told Taro to flee, to get far from this dangerous spirit before it decided to drag him into the deep as replacement for its lost strength. But Taro was 12 years old, and he saw not a monster, but a creature in distress, struggling as helplessly as a fish on dry land. He made a choice that would change both their lives. Moving slowly, speaking softly, Taro approached the kappa. He removed his water skin, leather, blessed by his mother that morning as she always blessed it, a habit from older times, and carefully poured water into the bowl atop the creature's head. The effect was immediate. Color returned to the kappa's skin. Its eyes, which had been dulling, brightened. Strength flowed back into its limbs. It stared at Taro with an expression of profound shock, as if unable to comprehend why a human would help rather than harm it in its moment of vulnerability. Taro knelt and bowed deeply, his forehead nearly touching the ground. "Please return safely to your home, honored spirit," he said. "The river needs its guardians." The young kappa bowed in return, and this time, not from trickery or tradition, but from genuine gratitude. Then it slipped back into the water and vanished beneath the surface, leaving only ripples that spread outward like echoes of a profound moment. Taro thought that would be the end of it. A strange encounter, a story he would tell his grandchildren someday. But the Kappa world is bound by different rules than the human one. Debts are remembered, kindnesses are repaid. 3 nights later, Taro woke to find a figure standing at his window, Kawataro himself, the river's eldest guardian. In the moonlight, the creature's eyes gleamed like black pearls, and when it spoke, its voice carried the weight of centuries. "You saved my grandchild," Kawataro said simply. "This debt cannot be ignored." Taro, brave enough to help a drowning Kappa, but still just a boy, trembled. I wanted no debt. I only did what seemed right." "That is why the debt must be repaid," Kawataro replied. "Kindness given freely is the most valuable kind. What do you desire? Gold from the river? The secret of finding the best fishing spots? The ability to swim like a Kappa, fast and deep?" Taro thought carefully. He thought of his family, of the village, of the injuries and illnesses that took people far too young, of the bone setter who traveled from village to village and was often too late to help. "Teach me to heal," he said finally. "Teach me the Kappa's knowledge of bones and joints, of setting what is broken and easing what causes pain." Kawataro studied him for a long moment, and then, slowly, nodded. "This is a good choice, a wise choice. Very well. Meet me at the river when the moon is full. Bring an empty mind and a respectful heart. The teaching will take many moons, and it will not be easy." And so began a tradition that lasted for 3 years. Every full moon, Taro would go to the river, and Kawataro would teach him. Not just the physical knowledge, which bones connected to which, how to feel for fractures, the proper way to manipulate a joint, but the deeper understanding, how the body's energy flowed like water through channels, how disruptions in that flow caused pain and disease, how healing was as much about understanding the patient's spirit as their physical form. Taro became the finest bone setter in 3 provinces. People traveled for days to seek his help. He healed broken limbs that other practitioners said would never mend, eased chronic pains that had plagued patients for years, saved lives that would otherwise have been lost to poorly set breaks or dislocated joints. And he never forgot. Every summer, on the night of the full moon in the 7th month, Taro would bring the largest, freshest cucumber from his garden to the river's edge. He would bow deeply to the water and whisper his thanks to Kawataro, to the young Kappa he had saved, to the river itself for its patient wisdom. When Taro grew old and his time came to die, he asked to be buried near the river. His children honored this request, and they say that on the night of his funeral, every Kappa in the river came to the surface. They lined the banks in the moonlight, silent and solemn, paying respects to the human who had learned their ways and used that knowledge only for healing, never for personal gain or pride. Kawataro himself placed a river stone on Taro's grave, smooth and black, worn by centuries of water, marked with a spiral that seemed to flow like current even in solid rock. That stone remained there for generations, a marker of the bond between human and Kappa, a reminder that respect and kindness could bridge even the widest differences. "My grandmother used to leave flowers on that grave," Kenji said softly, recognizing the story now. "She said it was for the ancestor who learned water's wisdom, but I never knew. I thought it was just a story." "All stories are true," Kawataro replied. "They may not be factual. Dates change, Names are forgotten, details blur with each telling, but they carry truth nonetheless. The truth of how things should be, even if they rarely are. The night had deepened around them. Frogs sang their ancient chorus. The mist had thinned slightly, and stars reflected in the river's surface like scattered diamonds. Kenji felt his eyelids growing heavy, but he fought against sleep. He wanted to hear more, to learn everything this creature could teach him. "Are there other stories?" he asked. "Other times when your kind and mine found understanding?" Kawataro's clicking laugh rippled through the darkness. "Oh yes, many stories. Some beautiful, some tragic, some strange beyond telling. The river has seen it all, and I have been its witness. Would you like to hear about the summer of the Sumo tournament? Or the autumn, when the merchant's daughter learned to swim like a kappa? Or perhaps the winter when the river nearly froze, and we had to teach the villagers how to keep the water flowing?" "All of them," Kenji said, settling more comfortably against the bridge's railing. "Tell me all of them." And so Kawataro continued, his voice blending with the river's murmur, the stories flowing one into another like tributaries joining a main stream, carrying Kenji deeper into the ancient past, into a world where magic and mundane intertwined as naturally as water and earth at the river's edge. The summer that the great Sumo tournament came to the province, the village was in an uproar. A wealthy daimyo had decided to tour the countryside, and his entourage included a wrestling troupe of considerable fame. They would perform in each village, accepting challenges from local champions, offering prizes to any who could defeat their wrestlers. The village had no sumo champions. They were farmers and craftspeople, their strength dedicated to working the land, not the refined art of the wrestling ring. But pride is a powerful force, and the village elder felt keenly that they should at least offer a challenger, lest they be seen as weak or cowardly. The problem was finding someone willing to face inevitable defeat and public humiliation. Into this situation stepped a young man named Hiroshi. He was the blacksmith's son, strong from years of working the forge, broad-shouldered and thick-armed. But he had no training in sumo, no understanding of its techniques or strategies. He simply had courage, or perhaps foolishness, and a desire to defend his village's honor. The night before the tournament, Hiroshi walked down to the river to think. He knew he would lose. The best he could hope for was to put up enough of a fight that the village wouldn't be completely embarrassed. He sat on the bank, watching moonlight play across the water, and did what many villagers did in times of uncertainty. He spoke to the river itself. "I'm going to make a fool of myself tomorrow," he said to the darkness. "But at least I'll try. That has to count for something, doesn't it?" A voice answered from the water. "It counts for more than you know." Hiroshi leaped to his feet, his heart hammering. Kawataro emerged from the river, water streaming from his shell, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. The blacksmith's son had heard stories all his life, but he had never expected to actually see the river guardian. "You wish to win?" Kawataro asked, tilting his head in that peculiar bird-like way. Yes. But I'm not foolish enough to think that's possible. These are professional wrestlers. I'm just someone with the courage to try." Kawataro interrupted. "That is not nothing. And courage, unlike technique, cannot be taught. But technique can be shared." The kappa climbed onto a flat rock, its small form somehow commanding in the moonlight. "We kappa invented sumo wrestling, did you know? Long before humans formalized it into a sport, we grappled on riverbanks and in shallow water, testing our strength and skill. Some of our techniques were eventually observed and adopted by your kind, but not all. There are moves known only to the river folk, strategies that work because they are unexpected. Hiroshi knelt, suddenly understanding the enormity of what was being offered. You would teach me? Why? Because you're willing to lose for your village's honor. Because you speak respectfully to the river. Because... Kawataro paused, and something like sadness crossed his features. Because it has been a long time since any human asked the river for help with anything that mattered. They pray for rain or fish or safe crossing, but they do not seek wisdom or partnership. You did not even ask, merely spoke your heart. That deserves reward. And so began a night of teaching unlike anything Hiroshi had experienced. Kawataro demonstrated moves that seemed impossible. How to use an opponent's strength against them. How to read balance through the slightest shift of weight. How to ground oneself like a stone in rushing water, immovable and patient. Do not try to overpower, Kawataro instructed. Your opponents will be stronger, more practiced. Instead, be like water. Flow around their strength. Find the spaces they leave unguarded. A river does not crash through a mountain. It finds the cracks and widens them slowly, patiently, until the stone itself gives way. They practiced through the night. Kawataro was stronger than his size suggested, and whenever Hiroshi tried to muscle through a technique, the kappa would easily toss him aside. But when Hiroshi relaxed, breathed, felt for the rhythm of movement rather than fighting against it, suddenly the techniques began to work. Remember, Kawataro said as dawn began to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. Sumo is not just about throwing your opponent. It is about respect, ritual, the proper forms. When you enter the ring, bow deeply, not just to your opponent, but to the earth beneath you, to the sky above, to the spirits that witness all contests. Show honor in victory or defeat, and you honor yourself. Hiroshi, exhausted but exhilarated, bowed deeply to his unlikely teacher. I don't know how to thank you. Win with grace or lose with dignity, Kawataro replied. That will be thanks enough. And when this is over, remember that the river gave you this gift. Treat it well, and teach others to do the same. The tournament drew a large crowd. Villagers from surrounding areas came to see the famous wrestlers, to enjoy the spectacle and festival atmosphere. The daimyo himself sat in a place of honor, fanned by servants, watching with amused interest as local challengers faced his champions. Most matches lasted seconds. Farmers and craftsmen, unused to the ring, found themselves quickly overpowered and thrown. The crowd cheered good-naturedly, understanding that this was entertainment, not true competition. Then came Hiroshi's turn. He entered the ring as Kawataro had taught him, bowing not just to his opponent, but to the earth and sky, and gathered witnesses. Something in his manner, the deliberateness of his movements, the centered calm he projected, made the professional wrestler's eyes narrow with interest. The match began. Hiroshi did not try to match strength with strength. When his opponent charged, Hiroshi shifted like water, let the force flow past him, used the momentum to his advantage. The wrestler grunted in surprise, stumbled, recovered his balance barely in time. The crowd murmured. This was lasting longer than expected. They circled each other, the professional wrestler now taking Hiroshi seriously, adjusting his strategy. He tried various techniques, each one countered by moves that seemed to come from nowhere, from an older tradition than the formal sumo style. Hiroshi felt it then, the rhythm Kawataro had described, his opponent's breathing, the slight shifts of weight, the micro-expressions that telegraphed intention. It was like reading the river's current, sensing the flow before it happened. he didn't win. Let's be clear about that. The professional wrestler had decades of experience, physical conditioning beyond what one night of learning could overcome. But Hiroshi lasted 10 minutes in the ring, an eternity in sumo terms, and when he was finally defeated, it was by a margin so slight that the crowd erupted in genuine appreciation. He had shown honor and courage. He had given the champion a real match, and he had done so with such grace and unexpected skill that the daimyo himself rose to applaud. The professional wrestler helped Hiroshi to his feet, bowing deeply, not the shallow bow of victor to vanquished, but a bow of respect between equals. "You trained with someone extraordinary," he said quietly. "Those techniques, I've never seen some of them before. Who was your teacher?" Hiroshi smiled, thinking of the small figure waiting in the river, probably watching from beneath the bridge. "An old master," he said truthfully. "Very old. He taught me that strength without wisdom is just force, but wisdom without courage is just theory." That night, Hiroshi brought an offering to the river. Not just cucumbers, but sake from the daimyo's own gift, rice balls made by his grateful mother, flowers his sisters had woven into a crown. He placed them carefully at the water's edge and whispered his thanks. Kawataro never showed himself that night. But in the morning, Hiroshi found a smooth river stone on his doorstep, carved with a spiral that looked like two wrestlers locked in eternal balance. He kept it all his life, a reminder that wisdom and strength could be found in the most unexpected places, and that the river's gifts were real for those who respected them. The story spread. Other young people began visiting the river, speaking respectfully, asking for wisdom or guidance. Not all received answers. Kawataro was selective, teaching only those who showed proper respect and genuine need. But occasionally, very occasionally, he would emerge from the depths and share some fragment of the river's ancient knowledge. And the village remembered, for a while at least, that they were not alone in the world, that spirits existed alongside them, neither wholly benevolent nor wholly malevolent, but complex as the water itself, giving and taking, teaching and testing, as ancient and enduring as the river that had carved the valley where they all lived. There was a girl named Hana, whose fate became legend, though few remember the true details now. She was the youngest daughter of a wealthy merchant, raised in comfort, educated in the arts suitable for a young lady of her station. Poetry, music, calligraphy, tea ceremony, all the refined accomplishments expected of someone destined to marry well and maintain a household. But Hana had a secret passion that would have shocked her family. She loved to swim. Not the delicate wading in garden pools that was considered appropriate, but real swimming, diving deep, feeling the water's embrace, pushing her limits beneath the surface. She had learned as a child from the village children, before her family's fortune improved and such rough play became forbidden. Those stolen summer afternoons had awakened something in her, a connection to water that felt more fundamental than all her refined accomplishments. As she grew older and her movements became more restricted by propriety and parental expectation, Hana would sneak out on summer nights to swim in the river. She knew it was dangerous, knew the stories of kappa and drownings and girls who disappeared into the current. But the risk was part of the appeal. In the water, she was free. In the water, she could be herself rather than the ornamental figure her family was shaping her to be. One night, swimming in her favorite deep pool, she realized she was not alone. Something swam beneath her, matching her movements perfectly. Not threatening, not yet, but present in a way that made her skin prickle with primal recognition. She had been seen by something that lived in the deep places, something that knew this element far better than any human ever could. She surfaced, treading water, her heart hammering. Moonlight painted silver paths across the river's surface, and there, on a rock that she could swear had been empty moments before, sat Kawataro. In the moonlight, the kappa looked almost beautiful. Alien and strange, yes, but beautiful in the way that predators are beautiful, in the way that ancient things carry beauty simply from the weight of years. His shell gleamed like polished jade. His eyes held depths that Hana recognized from her own swimming, the pull of water that went down forever. "You swim well for a human," Kawataro said, his voice like pebbles rolling in current. "But you could be better." Hana knew she should be terrified, should be swimming for shore, fleeing to safety. But instead, she found herself intrigued. "Could you teach me?" Kawataro tilted his head, considering. "Why would you want to learn? You have your other skills, your poetry, your music. Soon you'll marry some merchant's son and manage his household. What use is swimming then?" "I don't want to marry a merchant's son," Hana said, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "I don't want to spend my life in a house, managing servants, making tea, being ornamental. I want—" She trailed off, not quite sure how to articulate the yearning that had been growing in her chest. "You want to be free," Kawataro finished, "like the water, always moving, never quite contained, even when it seems still." "Yes," Hana breathed. "Exactly that." The kappa studied her with those ancient eyes. "Freedom has prices. The water is beautiful, but it is also cold and deep and indifferent. Fish are free, but they are also prey and predator both. Are you willing to accept all of freedom, not just the beautiful parts?" "I think so," Hana said, though uncertainty colored her voice. "Then I will teach you," Kawataro decided. "But you must come every night for a full moon cycle. Miss one night, and the teaching ends, and you must bring offerings, cucumbers, yes, but also stories. Tell me of your world, and I will teach you of mine." And so began a strange friendship that summer. Each night, Hana would slip from her father's house and come to the river. Kawataro would teach her to swim like a kappa, how to hold breath until her lungs screamed, how to move efficiently through water, how to see in the darkness of deep pools, how to sense currents and eddies and the movements of fish. But more than that, they talked. Hana told stories of her world, the suffocating expectations, the political maneuvering of merchant families, the way women were treated as property to be traded for advantage, the loneliness of being educated only to be ornamental, given skills only to display them, never to use them for her own purposes. Kawataro listened, and in return, told stories of the river's history, of times when humans had been more respectful, and times when they had been more cruel, of other kappa in other rivers, and the complex society that existed beneath the water's surface, invisible to humans, of the slow changes he had witnessed, forests cleared, rivers dammed, the gradual encroachment of a human world that left less and less space for anything else. "We are alike, you and I," Kawataro said one night as they floated together in a quiet eddy. "Both trapped in roles we did not choose. I am the river guardian, whether I wish it or not. You are the merchant's daughter, whether you wish it or not. But in these stolen moments, we are just ourselves." "Could I stay?" Hana asked suddenly. "Could I become something else? Not fully human, not fully kappa, but something between." Kawataro's expression grew sad. The old stories speak of such transformations, but they are rare and dangerous. To become truly of the water, you would have to surrender your human life completely. Your family would mourn you as drowned. Your name would be written on memorial stones, and you might not succeed. The river does not always accept those who seek to join it. But it's possible. Possible, yes. Wise? That is for you to decide. Hana swam in silence, considering. The moon had crossed half the sky before she spoke again. I don't want to leave them sad. My parents, my sisters. They don't understand me, but they love me in their way. But I also don't want to spend my life as a beautiful cage bird, singing pretty songs while longing for the sky. Then perhaps you need a third path, Kawataro suggested. Neither fully human nor fully spirit, but something in between. A bridge between worlds. He taught her in the final week of their time together a technique known only to the eldest Kappa. How to hold water in her lungs without drowning. How to slow her heartbeat until she seemed dead, then revive herself with a force of will. How to exist in the liminal space between breathing and not breathing. Between life and something that was not quite death, but not quite life either. When the moon cycle ended, Hana did not return to her father's house, but she did not vanish into the river either. Instead, she became something the village had not seen in generations, a wise woman who lived by the water, who could cure drowning victims after everyone else had given up hope, who taught children to swim safely and warned them away from dangerous currents, who could predict floods and droughts by reading signs invisible to others. Her family grieved, but eventually accepted that she had found her own path. Some said she had been touched by spirits and was no longer quite human. Others said she had simply gone mad and was best left to her strange life. But the village knew better. They knew she was a bridge between worlds, human enough to understand their needs, changed enough to perceive the river's truths. And on summer nights, if you watched carefully from the bridge, you might see two figures swimming together in the deep pool. One clearly Kappa, one not quite human anymore, both moving through the water with a grace that suggested they had found, if not freedom, then at least a kind of peace. Kawataro's voice had grown softer as he told this story, and Kenji realized that there was something personal in the tale, something that went beyond mere history. The Kappa had cared for Hana in whatever way such creatures could care, had perhaps lost her eventually when her human lifespan ran its course, and even the river's magic could not sustain her forever. Do you ever get lonely? Kenji asked quietly. Living so long, watching everyone else change and die? Kawataro was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Lonely is too small a word for what I feel. Imagine watching the same story repeat endlessly, with different actors, but the same themes. Humans are born, grow, forget, remember, make the same mistakes their ancestors made. They honor the river, then exploit it, then remember again only when drought or flood forces them to. And through it all, I remain, constant as the current, bearing witness to the wheel turning round and round. Then why stay? Kenji asked. Why not leave, find another river, start fresh somewhere else? Because this is my river, Kawataro replied simply. I am as bound to it as it is bound to me. We are one thing, really, the water and the spirit that guards it. To leave would be to die, or to become something so diminished that death might be preferable. So I stay. I watch. I wait. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone like you comes along and reminds me why I stay. The words hung in the night air like mist. Kenji felt the profound loneliness in them, the kind of isolation that came not from being alone, but from being unable to truly connect across the vast distance of years and experience. But he also felt honored to be counted among those who reminded this ancient being of purpose and meaning. That was a responsibility and a gift. Not all stories are of summer warmth and gentle waters. Sometimes the river tells harder truths, and Kawataro's voice took on a different quality as he spoke of the winter when the world nearly ended, or at least when it felt that way to the small universe of this valley and its river. It was a winter of unusual cold. Snow fell early and stayed late. Ice formed on the river's surface, thickening day by day, until it seemed the water itself had been transformed into a solid, silent thing. The villagers struggled. Crops had been poor that autumn. Stores ran low. Hunting was difficult in the deep snow. And the river, which usually provided fish even in lean times, was locked beneath ice too thick to break. The kappa suffered too, though humans rarely thought of that. They were creatures of water, and ice was a prison. Kawataro could survive beneath it. He was old enough, strong enough to find the deep pockets where liquid water still flowed, could slow his breathing to almost nothing, enter a state of dormancy that was not quite hibernation, but not quite wakefulness either. But the younger kappa, those not yet wise in the ways of deep winter, struggled. Some died, frozen in place when they surfaced for air and found solid ice above them. Others weakened dangerously, their strength fading as the cold sapped even the magical water in their head bowls. The village, in its desperation, made a terrible choice. It started when a hunter, half mad with hunger, broke through the ice and pulled up a young kappa that had been trapped beneath it. The creature was weak, barely alive. The hunter could have returned it to the water, found a place where the ice was thinner, giving the creature a chance at survival. But hunger makes monsters of good people. The hunter saw something else. Meat. Rare meat, perhaps magical meat, something that might feed his family. He brought the kappa back to the village, and word spread quickly. Desperate people began to gather. Someone suggested that eating kappa flesh might grant strength, might allow them to survive the winter. Old superstitions mixed with new desperation, and before anyone with wisdom could intervene, the young kappa was killed. Kawataro felt its death like a blade to his own heart. The river felt it too, a tremor that passed through the water, a grief that had weight and substance. The young kappa had been one of his descendants, many generations removed, but family nonetheless. He could have taken revenge, could have waited for the spring thaw, and dragged every hunter, every villager who had participated, down into the depths. Could have cursed the river, made it barren of fish, ensured that no one who drank from it found refreshment. The old stories spoke of kappa vengeance, and it was a terrible thing. But Kawataro did something unexpected instead. He saved them. On the coldest night of that cruel winter, when the ice was thickest and the village's food stores had dwindled to almost nothing, Kawataro performed a working of old magic, the kind that cost him dearly. He gathered his strength, called upon the river's deepest power, and created a path. Using techniques known only to the eldest water spirits, he broke the ice from beneath, carving channels that led fish up from the deep pools where they sheltered. He guided them to places where the villagers had cut holes for water, made it easy for even the weakest fishermen to catch what they needed. It drained him terribly. By the time spring came, Kawataro was so weak that he could barely move, his shell dull, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. He had spent months channeling his life force into keeping the village alive, even as they had killed one of his own. The village elder, an old woman named Chio, was the first to understand what had happened. She was one of the few who still remembered the old ways, who had kept the traditional offerings even when others mocked her for clinging to outdated beliefs. She went to the river as soon as the ice broke, bringing with her everything of value she could carry. She found Kawataro lying on a rock in the shallows, barely conscious. The water in his head bowl was clouded, stagnant. He was dying, slowly, worn down by the magic he had expended and the grief he carried. Chio waded into the cold spring runoff, ignoring the shock of it, and carefully lifted the kappa in her arms. He was surprisingly light, as if the winter had hollowed him out. She carried him to the deepest, cleanest pool she knew, and there she tended him. For 3 days and nights, she brought fresh water to pour into his bowl. She caught fish and placed them nearby, hoping he would eat. She sang the old songs her grandmother had taught her, songs that honored the river and its spirits. She told him stories to keep him anchored to the world, to give him reasons to continue. On the 4th day, Kawataro's eyes cleared. He looked at her with recognition, with something that might have been gratitude. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why save me, after what your people did?" "Because what they did was wrong," Chio said simply. "Because you saved us despite that wrong. Because the cycle of violence and revenge must be broken somewhere, by someone. Let it be broken here." Kawataro recovered slowly. Spring deepened into summer, and gradually his strength returned. But something had changed between him and the village. There was a new understanding, born of the winter's hardships and the choices made in desperation and in grace. The villagers, learning what Chio had done and understanding what Kawataro had done for them, gathered at the river on the first night of summer. They brought offerings, not just cucumbers, but apologies, not just food, but genuine respect and remorse. The village elder spoke for them all. "We forgot ourselves," she said. "We forgot that spirits are not just stories, that the river is not just water, that actions have consequences beyond our immediate needs. We are sorry. We are grateful. We will remember." Kawataro emerged from the water that night, and for the first time in the village's memory, he spoke directly to the entire gathering. "I could have let you starve. I could have taken revenge, but vengeance begets only more vengeance, and I am tired of that cycle. I am tired of watching humans forget and remember, honor and violate in endless repetition." He paused, his ancient eyes sweeping across the crowd. "So I offer you a bargain. I will continue to guard this river, to keep its waters clean and its fish plentiful. I will warn of floods and droughts. I will save those who fall in and deserve saving. But in return, you must remember, not just for a season or a year, but for generations. Teach your children the old courtesies. Honor the water and all who dwell in it. And never again mistake desperation for justification." The villagers agreed. They built a small shrine by the river, maintained it faithfully, ensured that offerings were made regularly. They taught their children the stories, not as entertainment, but as binding truths, as compacts with the world beyond human understanding. And for many years, the bargain held. The river prospered. The village prospered. Kawataro kept his word, and the humans kept theirs. But of course, as Kawataro had said, humans forget. Not all at once. Not completely. But gradually, generation by generation, the stories became less urgent. The offerings became sporadic. The shrine fell into disrepair. And eventually, Most people stopped believing altogether. Kawataro retreated deeper into the river, interacting less with humans, growing more solitary. He had tried. He had offered chances for understanding, for cooperation. But the wheel turned regardless, and he was left alone again, guardian of a river that fewer and fewer people respected or even acknowledged. "That's the saddest story yet," Kenji said quietly. The night had grown very late, and exhaustion was catching up with him, but he found himself unwilling to leave, to let this moment end. "It is what it is," Kawataro replied, not happy or sad, just true. The cycle continues. People forget, then remember, then forget again. I endure through it all. "But I'll remember," Kenji said with sudden intensity. "I'll tell people. I'll make sure they know." "Will you?" Kawataro interrupted gently. "Tomorrow, in daylight, will you still believe this night happened? Or will you convince yourself it was a dream, a hallucination, stress, and moonlight playing tricks? And even if you do believe, will others? Or will they smile indulgently and think you've been reading too many old stories?" Kenji opened his mouth to protest, then closed it, because Kawataro was right. Already, part of his mind was trying to rationalize the experience, to find explanations that fit within the bounds of the possible. "I want to believe," he said finally. "I want this to be real." "Then hold on to that want," Kawataro said. "Let it be enough. Not everyone needs to believe. Not everyone needs to remember. Just enough people, just enough respect to keep the river alive in human consciousness. That's all I ask." The sky was beginning to lighten in the east, that subtle shift from black to deep blue that precedes true dawn. The frogs had stopped singing. Night birds gave way to early risers. The world was preparing to wake, and the time of mysteries was drawing to a close. Kenji felt it, the liminal moment ending, the return to ordinary reality approaching. Soon, he would have to leave this bridge, return to his life of school and family expectations and the mundane concerns of the everyday world. The thought filled him with unexpected grief. "Will I see you again?" he asked. Kawataro regarded him thoughtfully. "That depends on many things, on whether you keep coming to the river, on whether you maintain respect for the old ways, on whether you prove to be like Taro or Hana or Chio, someone who can bridge the worlds, or someone who forgets once the magic fades." "I don't want to forget." "Then don't," Kawataro said simply. "It's a choice, you know. Forgetting. People think it just happens, that time erodes memory naturally. But really, people choose to forget because remembering is difficult. It requires effort, intentionality. It requires believing in things that don't fit neatly into modern explanations." The kappa slipped back into the water until only his head remained above the surface, his bowl catching the first rays of approaching sunlight. "Go home, Kenji. Sleep. Dream of rivers and old times. And when you wake, decide what kind of person you want to be. One who remembers or one who forgets. Either way, the river will still flow. I will still be here. The choice is yours alone." Kenji stood, his legs stiff from sitting so long. He bowed deeply as he knew how, holding the position for a long moment. When he straightened, Kawataro had vanished beneath the surface, leaving only ripples that spread outward in perfect circles. He walked home as dawn broke fully, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The village was still asleep. No one saw him slip back into his house, into his room, into his bed that felt strange and confining after a night spent by the river. He didn't sleep immediately. Instead, he lay there, replaying every moment of the encounter, burning it into his memory. The feel of the kappa's wet hand on his ankle, the sound of that liquid voice speaking ancient truths, the weight of centuries in those dark eyes, the stories that wound through time like water through stone. When sleep finally came, his dreams were full of rivers. Months passed, then years. Kenji grew older, as humans do. He finished school, left the village for university in the city, returned for holidays and festivals. His life followed the expected pattern: education, work, marriage, children, the normal arc of human existence. But he kept one promise to himself. Every time he returned to the village, he visited the river. Sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes for hours. He would sit on the old bridge, remember that night of mist and magic, and speak softly to the water. He never saw Kawataro again, not clearly at least. But sometimes, when the light was right and the mist was thick, he thought he glimpsed movement in the deep pools. Sometimes he would find a river stone on the bridge rail, placed with deliberate care. Sometimes, swimming in the river on hot summer days with his own children, he would feel that familiar presence beneath the surface, watching, protecting, remembering. He taught his children the old stories, not as fairy tales, but as something more, as history, as truth, as compact. He showed them how to bow to the river, how to leave offerings, how to swim safely while respecting the currents. He taught them about Taro and Hana and Chiyo, about the summer of the Sumo tournament and the winter of almost silence. His daughter, the younger one, listened most intently. She had that same love of water that Hana had possessed, that same sense that she belonged more to the river than to the land. Kenji watched her with a mixture of pride and concern, wondering if she too would find her way to that liminal space between worlds. One summer evening, when she was 12, the same age Taro had been when he saved the young Kappa, she came running to him with her eyes bright with wonder. "Papa, I saw him. I saw the Kappa. He was sitting on a rock downstream, and he looked at me, and he smiled." Kenji's heart clenched. Part of him wanted to dismiss it, to protect her from a path that might lead to a life lived between worlds, never quite fitting into either. But another part, the part that remembered a night of mist and magic, that still believed despite years of ordinary reality, wanted to honor her experience. "What did you do?" he asked carefully. "I bowed," she said simply. "Like you taught me." And he bowed back, and then he was gone. Kenji held his daughter close, feeling the wheel turn, the cycle continue. Another generation, another chance for understanding between humans and the spirits that shared their world. Would she remember? Would she keep the old ways alive? Or would she, like so many before her, forget once the magic of childhood faded? Only time would tell. But at least she had been given the chance. At least the stories had been passed down. At least someone still spoke to the river with respect and received occasionally a response. That night, after his daughter had gone to bed, still buzzing with excitement, Kenji walked down to the river alone. He stood on the bridge where his journey had begun so many years ago, and he spoke into the darkness. "Thank you," he said simply, "for that night, for the stories, for showing yourself to my daughter, for staying despite everything, despite the forgetting and the disrespect and the long loneliness." A voice answered from the water, unchanged by the passing years. "Thank you for remembering, for teaching the next generation, for being one of the bridges between worlds. It matters more than you know." Kawataro did not emerge fully, but Kenji saw the gleam of ancient eyes in the moonlight, the ripple of water moved by something more than current. "Will you teach her?" Kenji asked. "As you taught Taro and Hana? As you taught me, in your way?" "If she proves worthy," Kawataro replied. If she keeps coming to the river, if she maintains respect and curiosity in equal measure. The river always needs guardians on the human side, just as it has guardians on the spirit side. Perhaps she will be one. And if she forgets, then the wheel turns again, and we wait for the next one. But I don't think she will forget. She has your blood and Akiko's before you, and all the way back to Taro and Chiyo. Some families carry the memory in their bones. I think yours is one of them. Kenji felt tears prick his eyes, though he couldn't have said exactly why. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude, or simply the overwhelming sense that he was part of something larger than himself, a story that stretched back centuries and would continue for centuries more. The river is fortunate to have you, he said. The river is fortunate to have both of us, Kawataro corrected gently. Spirits and humans, each incomplete without the other. That is the truth the old times understood. We are not separate, not enemies, but partners in keeping the world balanced. Forget that, and both sides suffer. The moon had risen high, full, and bright, turning the river into a path of silver light. Kenji stood watching it, committing the moment to memory, knowing that this too was a gift, this conversation, this connection, this continuation of a story begun in mist and magic years ago. And so the river flows on, as it has for millennia, as it will for millennia more. Its waters carry countless stories of Kappa and humans, of friendship and conflict, of forgetting and remembering. Each stone in its bed has witnessed dramas both grand and small. Each fish that swims its currents is part of an ecology older than human civilization. Kawataro remains, guardian and witness, lonely and patient, watching the wheel turn. He sees children grow to adults, grow to elders, grow to memories. He sees villages transform into towns, transform into cities. He sees forests cleared and replanted, technologies advance and fail, civilizations rise and fall in miniature around his river. And through it all, occasionally, not often, but occasionally, someone stops. Someone sees the footprints in the mud, the cucumber floating upstream, the strange ripples in the current. Someone bows. Someone remembers. Someone becomes, for however brief a time, a bridge between worlds. These moments sustain him. They remind him why he stays, why he endures the long loneliness and the cyclical forgetting. Because the alternative, a world where spirits retreat completely, where magic is dismissed entirely, where rivers are nothing but H2O flowing downhill, would be a poorer world for both humans and spirits alike. On nights when the moon is full and the mist rises thick from the water, if you stand on the old bridge and listen carefully, you might hear stories being told. Ancient tales in liquid voices, speaking of times when the boundary between worlds was thin and permeable, when respect flowed both ways, like water in a stream. You might see a small figure on the rocks, shell gleaming in moonlight, eyes dark with the weight of centuries. You might feel a presence beneath the surface, patient and powerful, neither malevolent nor benign, but simply present, as the river itself is present. And if you're wise, if you remember the old courtesies, the proper forms, the respect that all living things deserve, you might bow, and the river might bow back. And for a moment, just a moment, the ancient compact would be renewed, the connection reforged, the partnership between worlds acknowledged and honored once more. The river asks so little, really. Just respect, just remembrance, just the acknowledgement that it exists beyond human purposes, that it has value beyond what it provides, that it is home to spirits and stories as surely as it is home to fish and frogs and flowing water. Such a small thing to ask, such a small thing to give, and yet it means everything. Let yourself drift now, like a leaf on the current. Let the stories wash over you, gentle as summer rain, patient as water smoothing stone. Close your eyes and hear the river's song, that eternal murmur of water over rock, the soft splash of fish rising, the whisper of wind through reeds. The river flows through all seasons. In spring, it runs high and fast with snowmelt, bringing life back to the world. In summer, it slows and warms, inviting children to swim and fishermen to cast their lines. In autumn, leaves drift on its surface like small boats bearing the year's memories downstream. In winter, even when ice forms on its surface, the water beneath continues flowing, patient and unstoppable. Kawataro remains, watching over his domain. The Kappa who has seen empires rise and fall, who has witnessed countless human lives bloom and fade like flowers. He is lonely, yes, but he is not without purpose. He guards the river because that is what he was meant to do, what he has always done, what he will continue to do for as long as the water flows. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, he finds connection, a human who stops and listens, a child who sees footprints in the mud and understands they mean something, an adult who remembers the old stories and teaches them to the next generation. These moments of connection ripple outward like stones thrown into still water, affecting more than we know. A child who learns to respect the river grows into an adult who protects it. An adult who honors the old ways teaches others to do the same. One act of remembrance leads to another, and slowly, very slowly, the tide of forgetting is pushed back, just a little. The stories continue, the river flows, the Kappa keeps watch, and somewhere, always, someone is learning to bow. Let your breathing slow now, matching the gentle rhythm of water lapping at the shore, in and out like the tide, rise and fall like the river's level through the seasons. Your heartbeat steadies, finds its proper pace, becomes one with the ancient pulse of water moving through the world. You are safe here by the river, protected by old magics and older courtesies. The stories have been told, the lessons have been shared. Now is the time for rest, for dreams, for letting consciousness slip away like water through cupped hands. The river will be here when you wake. Kawataro will still be keeping watch. The bridge will still span the water, connecting bank to bank, world to world, past to present to future. Nothing ends here. Everything continues, flowing forward like the water itself, eternal and patient. Sleep now, with the river's song as your lullaby. Dream of mist and moonlight, of ancient spirits and respectful humans, of summers by the water and stories told in liquid voices. Dream of cucumbers floating upstream and Kappa teaching Sumo and children learning to swim like the river's guardians. Dream of a world where spirits and humans live in balance, where respect flows both ways, where magic is remembered and honored. Dream of bridges between worlds, and know that you can be one of those bridges if you choose, when you wake. But for now, sleep. Rest. Let the river carry your consciousness gently downstream, into the deep pools where dreams gather like fish. Let Kawataro watch over you as he has watched over this valley for 3 centuries. Let the water's eternal flowing be the soundtrack to your rest. The stories have been told. The river flows on. The guardian keeps watch. And you, dear listener, can finally rest.